Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I am honored to be here representing the John Birch Society today, and we're going to be speaking today concerning the very important subject, morality and freedom, America's dynamic dual. We talk about the foundations of our nation. There's a scripture that declares, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Our rights come from God. Our rights do not come from the government. The Declaration of Independence, which was signed in 1776, says these words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Our rights come from God, not the government. But these rights that come from God, ladies and gentlemen, are secured by our United States Constitution. The Declaration of Independence further declares that to secure these God-given rights, governments are instituted among men, and they derive their just powers from the consent of the government. In other words, it's a government of, by, and for the people. John Birch inspired our founder, Robert Welch, and Robert Welch wrote in the Blue Book in 1958, I quote, "The young man that I admire most of all those America has ever produced was a fundamentalist Baptist missionary named John Birch. My own obsession with this fight against the increasing forces of evil in the world, which, as already explained, has caused me to give up business, career, and income, and any other prospect of ever having any peace or leisure again during my lifetime. This is due in large part to my admiration for John Birch, to my feelings that I simply had to pick up and carry to the utmost of my ability and energy the torch of a humane righteousness, which he, John Birch, carried so well and so faithfully when the communists struck him down," unquote. Now, what is the purpose of the John Birch Society? Again, Robert Welch in Section 8 of the Blue Book said these words, quote, "The purpose of the John Birch Society, as officially stated, will be to promote less or limited government, more personal responsibility, and, with God's help, a better world. The purpose also, as unofficially described and discussed among ourselves, will be exactly, ladies and gentlemen, the same thing. Therefore, our short-range purpose and our long-range purpose and our everlasting purpose is to promote limited government, more personal responsibility, and, with God's help, a better world," unquote. Less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Now, on the other hand, Robert Welch, quoting him again in the JBS Bulletin, dated in September 1961, told us what the purpose of the conspiracy was. And he quotes, "Our fight against the communist conspiracy is today the most urgent and important part of our total effort. But this fight is still purely incidental to our positive and permanent purpose. That purpose is, again, and he reiterates, to bring about less government, more personal responsibility, and, with God's help, a better world. Secondly, since it is the purpose of the communist conspiracy to bring about total government and an absence of all personal responsibility and a completely immoral world, we must do all that we possibly can to help destroy the communist conspiracy at the earliest possible moment," unquote. Now, let us contrast these two purposes, the JBS versus the conspiracy. On the one hand, John Birch Society, we look to the United States of America as a sovereign, constitutional republic. At the government level, we believe in less government. We want a restoration of our constitutional republic. On the other hand, the conspiracy operating on the premises of the United Nations or totalitarian world government, they want total government, totalitarian United Nations world government. Now, on the second level of the personal level, those of us as individuals in the John Birch Society, we want more personal responsibility. We want an increasing degree of freely, without coercion, adhering to absolute moral principles. Contrastly, the United Nations and the totalitarian world government want an absence of all personal responsibility and zero adherence to any absolute moral principles. And finally, collectively, on a cultural level, we in the John Birch Society want for the United States of America as a sovereign constitutional republic, we want, with God's help, a better world, greater adherence to large and sustaining moral principles by collective citizens in general. Conversely, the United Nations, through the totalitarian one world government, wants just the opposite. They want a completely amoral world. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, zero adherence to moral principles by citizens, leading to chaos and anarchy. Someone may ask, as many people have asked me over the years, why does the John Birch Society have such a negative public image? I don't have all the answers, ladies and gentlemen, to that question. But the few facts I do have, I know that in around 1960, 1961, the communist press in the Soviet Union and the United States initiated an intensive smear attack on the John Birch Society. Later on in 1961, the Council on Foreign Relations that dominates the news media in the United States repeated and amplified the communist smear attack on the John Birch Society. But in the mid-60s, the conspiracy switched their tactics from loud, continuous smears of the John Birch Society to profound silence punctuated by occasional negative articles. We must expose the enemy, and we must save our country. Quoting Robert Welch in the publication Truth and Time in 1966, he says these words, quote, "But the communist movement is only a tool of the total conspiracy. The enemy, which we need to oppose, then expose and destroy in order to save our great nation and our civilization, can properly be identified as the communist conspiracy. But, however, to understand this enemy, it is very important to remember and to understand its roots," unquote. Again, morality and freedom. We're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, how these two principles are linked together. Morality and freedom is the powerhouse of America. Morality and freedom is America's dynamic dual, because morality and freedom will automatically bring about limited government, more personal responsibility to fill the void, and with God's help, which is the most important, a much better world. What is our vision? What is our vision in the John Birch Society? What is the vision for a morally better world with God's help? We have 5 bullet points. The first one is American patriots, those who love their nation, those who love America. Way back when this country was founded, as a minister of the gospel, this has always been very, very close to my heart, because there were a group of ministers called the Black Regiment. Now, the Black Regiment, they were patriots. They wore their clergy robes, their black clergy robes in the pulpit, but they had on military uniforms under those clergy robes, and they stood. They were Episcopalians, they were Congregationalists, they were Pentecostals, they were Baptists, but all of these clergymen loved their nation. They loved America, and they were called the Black Regiment because they would stand in their pulpits on Sunday in their black clergy robes, but they were fighters, and they fought for liberty and justice and equality. These patriots, ladies and gentlemen, would preserve our God-given rights, namely, as the Declaration of Independence has subscribed, life, which is most important, because without life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness are no issues. We would preserve life, liberty, property, free exercise of religion, right to bear arms, through preserving our nation's sovereignty as a constitutional republic, and through the United States Constitution, which secures these God-given rights. Secondly, the lives of all the preborn children, the unborn, would be protected. We would do away with that abomination called Roe versus Wade. And we would stand for the sanctity of life, which is constitutional, based on what the Constitution has said, that our God-given rights are, first of all, the right to life. The right to life, pro-life, is constitutional. The right to abortion is unconstitutional. Yet, because we have been deceived, we have made evil good and good evil. We have made the right to abort our offspring constitutional and the right to life unconstitutional. That is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. We must get back to the principles of our founding fathers and the Constitution, which says of these God-given rights, the first and most important is the right to life. Third bullet point, the traditional family would be preserved and the homosexual agenda would be rejected. Right now in America, we have been calling good evil and calling evil good. Right has become wrong. Wrong has become right. Bitter has become sweet. Sweet has become bitter. Things that 50, 60 years ago would have been a disgrace, would have stayed in the closet, are now prancing boldly in our faces day and night, saying that we must adhere to these ungodly and immoral lifestyles. But the traditional family, marriage, traditional marriage, one man, one woman for life. When I was coming up, I'm 64 years old. When I was coming up, the idea of a man marrying another man, someone would have thought that I'd been ready for the nut house if I'd even have thought of such a ridiculous idea. But today, those who adhere to the traditional family of marriage, which has always been for 2,000 plus years, of one man and one woman raising children and have an extended family, has now been made to be disdained. And those who would hold forth all type of devious and ridiculous lifestyles have come to the forefront. We must reject this homosexual perverted agenda. We must pray and help those who have been caught up in this bondage and help them that they may be set free. Because remember, ladies and gentlemen, morality and freedom, God says that we shall know the truth and the truth shall set us free. Let us pray for those who find themselves caught up in this devious lifestyle, that they may see the error of their ways and be turned around. Fourth, the moral absolutes of our Christian-style civilization would be transmitted to our children. Whether we like it or not, our nation was birthed in Judeo-Christian ethics. We probably have never been a 100% Christian nation, but all of our laws, all of our mores have been based on the 10 commandments of God passed down to us from Moses. And our foundation, as I read earlier, if the foundations of a nation are destroyed, what can the righteous do? And the answer is, ladies and gentlemen, the righteous can do nothing if the foundations are destroyed. Our foundations were not built on Islam. Our foundations were not built on agnosticism and atheism and secular humanism. Our foundations, ladies and gentlemen, was built on the 10 commandments of God. And finally, we would reject the welfare state. We would embrace and we would help people to understand that a free nation is a nation that is going to prosper under the free enterprise system. We would help people to really be self-sufficient, not by giving them a fish and feeding them for a day and making them subservient to an all-compassing state, but we would teach them how to fish. And after teaching them how to fish, we'd help them and show them the way to buy the pond that they could not only feed themselves, but feed others. This is freedom. This is true freedom when we walk in strong, moral, Judeo-Christian principles tied into free enterprise. That is the way to eliminate poverty, not through socialistic programs. Someone may ask, well, is the John Birch Society, preacher, a religious organization? Again, quoting our founder, Robert Welch, from the John Birch resolutions dated December 1970, and he says these words concerning that subject, quote, "It is the cardinal principle of the John Birch Society that every man's religious beliefs constitute a personal matter, which is outside of our area of influence or involvement. It has been and forever is our great undertaking to bring into one body for the first time in human history truly good men and women of all sects, denominations, and creeds, and here's the key, who will work together in harmony, unity, and one accord with tolerant goodwill for those spiritual ideals and noble purposes which they do hold in common," unquote. In other words, the John Birch Society is not a church. The John Birch Society is not a religion. The John Birch Society is not a denomination. But the John Birch Society encompasses and brings together good people in all of these different sects and denominations and religions that hold good common purposes in harmony. In other words, limited government being replaced by more personal responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. However, religious faith, ladies and gentlemen, is the basis of morality, and morality is the basis of the John Birch Society. Again, quoting Robert Welch in the John Birch Society Bulletin dated September 1961, and we read these words, quote, "Each member of the John Birch Society has derived that very sense of morality with which we are concerned from their own personal faith as its foundation." Again, we keep hearing the word foundation. That's very important, ladies and gentlemen. Again, we read in the scripture, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord." And again, we read, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked bear rule, the people mourn." Again, quote, "Simple cooperation and mutual support between men and women of goodwill and good conscience in forwarding those moral purposes which are held in common by them all, and which joint purposes are made stronger and more resolute by the very depth of their respective faiths." There has to be a depth of faith, because religious faith without a wholesome fear of God, there is no basis for morality. And morality is the basis for our great society. And finally, Robert Welch tells us, we begin this cooperation with a total belief in absolute moral values. And we renounce the spirit of relativity as our foundation for morality. In other words, as Jesus said, "Yet your yea be yea, and your nay, nay. Right is not wrong, and wrong is not right. Evil is not good, and good is not evil. What is right, and what is wrong is wrong. Black is black, white is white. Day is day, and night is night, and the twain shall never meet." We must reject the spirit of this age, which is postmodernism, which says that there are no absolute truths, that truth, as Pilate said to Jesus, "What is truth?" and he was looking at truth because truth was not a concept. Truth is a person. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except by me. We must hold to a strong foundation of absolute moral principles and renounce and reject moral relativism. What are we fighting here? Morality and freedom, America's dynamic duel. Our battle, ladies and gentlemen, ultimately is not material. Our battle, ladies and gentlemen, ultimately is not political. Our battle, ladies and gentlemen, ultimately is not social or even cultural, even though we hear a lot today about the culture wars. Our battle is according to the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, when we see these words, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, unquote. Robert Welch, in the John Birch Society Bulletin of January 1962, went to the Holy Writ and quoted the Apostle Paul, saying that we are not fighting mere human forces. We are fighting invisible, eternal spiritual forces. And that is the reason why we go from battle to battle, swinging at the leaves on the tree, swinging at symptoms, rather than actually ever hitting the taproot, which are spiritual forces, which are set in the invisible realm against our great nation in order to destroy it. And that's the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, morality is tied directly into liberty. That's the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, morality is tied directly into freedom. That's the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, morality and freedom is America's dynamic duel. Let's put out the call for morality. The call for morality says we must renounce evil. We must renounce communism. Again, quoting our founder in the JBS Bulletin of 1962, and we read these words, quote, we are not arguing against an ideology. We are battling against evil, he says. And as a general rule, in looking at any concerted movement, the following very simple criteria may be safely applied. And Mr. Welch gives us this criteria in the form of a question. The question is this, ladies and gentlemen, is it morally right? Is it morally right? Robert Welch contends that if it is morally right, which implies that you must have absolute moral values, then it is anti-communist in effect, even if not in conscious purpose. On the other hand, in the negative, the question comes, is it morally wrong? Is it morally wrong? The answer, then it is pro-communist in effect, and almost, as our founder tells us, certainly in purpose, unquote. Also, Mr. Welch tells us, for communism is intrinsically evil. That's a strong statement. But I love this man because he calls an ace and a spade a spade. The communists, he says, have chosen to make a complete breakdown of all morality, not only as a means to their ultimate end, but as a part of the end itself, unquote. One of the strategies of the insiders of the communists has always been to destroy a nation from within. One of their strategists, a man named Antonio Gramsci, I believe his name was, came up with the evil but yet brilliant idea that you could do more harm to the United States and capitalistic societies by breaking down their moral structures than you ever could using military might. He said, if you destroy them from the inside out, destroy them with murder, destroy them with drugs, destroy them with alcohol, destroy them with pre-sex immorality, destroy them with perversion, destroy them with pornography, destroy them with alcohol and gambling, and on and on and on. And he says, they will fall into our hands like rotten, maggot-infested fruit falling from a diseased tree. So, how do we defeat this conspiracy? Robert Welch, in the Blue Book of 1958, gives us this profound statement. Quote, he says, we simply, and I love this, we simply are not going to be able to save our country from either the immediate threat of communism or the long-range threat of socialism, listen, ladies and gentlemen, by organizational leadership alone. Ponder that for a second. He says, our only possible chance is dynamic, personal leadership. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we need in America a spiritual revival. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? For when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked bear rule, the people mourn. We need a restoration of decency. We need a revival of morality. Robert Welch also said in the Blue Book in 1958, as I have said before, no collection of debating societies, in other words, talking heads, are ever going to stop the communist conspiracy from taking us over. And I love this, what he says. He says, and I have no intention of adding another frustrated group to their number. He says, we mean business every step of the way. He's my kind of brother. He says, we're not out here playing. We're not out here playing tiddlywinks or footsies. We mean business every step of the way, because we're not going to win this spiritual war by debating and having dialogues and trying to cozy up with the enemy. We have no intention of adding the John Birch Society as another frustrated debating society. We mean business every step of the way. He says there's simply no chance of saving our country unless, and here's the hope, ladies and gentlemen, the John Birch Society acquires enough strength. In 1975, Robert Welch said this, there simply is no chance of saving our country and our people from being enslaved by the communist tools of the conspiratorial insiders unless the John Birch Society acquires enough strength, unless the John Birch Society carries out a sufficient amount of education and creates enough understanding of this greatest contest in history between, listen, ladies and gentlemen, between slavery and freedom. Between slavery and freedom. Between slavery and freedom. Why? To provide the balance of power on the side of the forces for freedom. So in closing, ladies and gentlemen, less government, more responsibility at a personal level, and with God's help, a much better world. George Washington is quoted as saying, it is impossible to rightly govern without God and the Bible. Andrew Jackson said, the Bible is the rock on which this constitutional republic stands. But in June of 2002, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco ruled that the Pledge of Allegiance was unconstitutional because it had the words, in God we trust. And I would submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that it's time for a revival in America. It's time to bring America back to its limited government. It's time to take more personal responsibility, and it's time to get on our knees and with God's help, ask God to help us to have a better world. It's time, ladies and gentlemen, to again link morality and freedom. And in so doing, we will see America once again become the great nation that it always was. God bless you. Thank you.